Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to do another video. Today we're going to build the Wishbone connector. So the Wishbone connector is one of the most difficult things you will have to do on the inventor exam. And there's reasons for that. It's using some pretty advanced modeling techniques that I will go through because it seems a lot of people have had trouble with this. And I've gotten a lot of calls to make one of these videos. So what you're going to do is on Solid Professor, you're going to want to follow along with this. I really recommend you do like the two monitor thing where you watch my video in one monitor and then have the assignment open and Inventor open in the other one so that you can follow along. I'm going to go into batch 7 assessment. This is where you're going to find this on Solid Professor. And you'll look at this and you're going to come down to the Wishbone connector. Once you click Wishbone connector and it loads, come on, Solid Professor, there we go. Download now. And you're going to see this guy. So what do we notice about this part while we're getting ready to make it? So it's saying that for the reference lessons we're going to need a curve-driven pattern and mirror geometry. So you already know that you're going to have to use the curve-driven pattern and 3D mirroring. So if you are unfamiliar with those, I recommend you pause this video and go back and watch those videos first. So if you have watched those videos, we're going to move on. So we're going to create a new part in Inventor using inches units. So if you started your part, you can go up here to Tools, Document Settings, Units, and then change the length to inches. And hit Apply, Close. Cool, we got that. We're going to create the remaining 3 geometry of the Wishbone connector based on the drawing views shown below. So the main one we're going to be looking at, because most of our modeling is going to happen in this. Now, if you look, this part is symmetrical. And it's symmetrical a couple different ways. We could fold it down this middle line, so fold this side over to the other side, and they would match up exactly. But we could also mirror it this way. We could fold it like hot dog style, and it would also still be symmetrical. What that means is that we really only need to make 1/4 of this part in our sketch, and then we can just mirror the rest. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about the design intent, that this would take a long time to make if you just tried to model the whole thing. But now we only have to model 1/4 of it, which is going to save us a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it's going to look better in the end. So the first couple of things to notice, I'm going to start off wanting to sketch just this general shape. What we notice here is we've got a dimension here, and a dimension here. What that means to me is that we need 3 different arcs or lines or whatever we end up using here to create this, because each line can only have 1 length dimension associated to it. So we know that this has to be 1 line and not a couple different pieces. Now we're also going to have to make a line here and here for our mirroring purpose, so we can mirror this way and this way. We'll need a mirror plane. We'll get to that in a minute. So I'm just going to start here. I'm going to start a 2D sketch. And for a fair warning, I've made this part before in preparation for this video, and it took me some time, and I had to go back and like undo a couple things. So just be prepared. I might have to undo some things in this video. So first, I'm just going to kind of make these 2 lines here. This is our general shape for the wishbone. These are our mirror lines, I mean. So now to make the other arc, the one that's kind of going up this way, I'm just going to grab this tool. I need to make sure that I'm getting right at the end of this with the green dot. So there, I finally found my green dot. Zooming out. I'm just going to put this like here-ish. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to dimension it anyway. So now I need to get the little thingy guy, the little arc thing, on the outer edge of the wishbone. So I'm going to again grab my 3-point arc. So 1 click for where I want to start, one click for the general area where I want to end. And I'm going to go up and see how that little constraint thing shows up where these two lines meet, where these two arcs meet. I'm going to click then. Now, if you've missed that, that's fine. You can add this later. This is the tangent constraint. This is just going to make it a lot smoother between our two parts. And then finally, we need the little guy underneath here. So I'm going to do the same thing where I try and get it with the tangent constraint. Now, again, this isn't perfect. What we need to do is get this general shape onto our line down here. So what I'm going to do, all right, so looking at this, if this is our middle line right here, we have this arc, and that arc has a dimension. Now we're going to give it that dimension, but we need to be careful because we don't actually need the whole arc. We just need half of it because the other half is going to be on this side. If we have the full arc, we're going to get this weird W shape in our wishbone whenever we decide to mirror it. So how can I get the half of this arc exactly? Well, I can use a dimension, a constraint, pardon me. So we're going to use the coincident constraint. So using the coincident constraint, we can grab this center arc, the center of this arc right here, and the end of our line. And if we click both of those, see how this has changed shape? It's gotten a lot bigger. That's fine for now because, again, we're going to add dimensions to it. But now we're getting about half of this arc. Well, it's more than half of it right now, but it will be half of it in a minute. So what we're going to do, so the first dimension we need is right here. See, it has this 2x here. That means that there's going to be two different dimensions on this part that have that same constraint, that same dimension, this is 60. The r next to it means that we are trying to dimension the radius. So the radius is the distance from the outer edge of a circle to its center point. So for us, what that means is if we have our circle here, our center point's way up here. We need to change the radius between these two to be 60. So to do that, I'm just going to grab my dimension tool and I'm going to click on this line. And you can see it's already doing that. We just need to click again. And I'm going to set this to 60. And now our part's going to get really big for a second. Okay, so this is why dimensioning is important, because 60 inches is a lot bigger than 60 millimeters. And that can really make the difference in whether your part performs the way that you want it to. Okay, over here, again, we see this 2x. So we should know that that means that there are two dimensions that have this. So that's this arc here and this arc here. And we know it's another radius, and we know that it's going to be 250. We're going to grab our dimension tool again, set this guy to 2.5. Cool, so that one was pretty much there. And then this last one is 0.75. And there's only one of these, remember, because it's in the middle. Okay, so 0.75. And as you can see, now we've got a much neater, like I would be okay with this over the edge there. So this looks pretty good. What about this here and this down here? We don't really know how long those are or how long they're supposed to be because they don't really tell us that much. We're going to have to do some finagling with that later. We know that the distance from here to here, if you look at the way these dimension lines come out, this whole thing is 550, but we're not doing the whole thing. We're only doing half of it. So sometimes you need to do a little bit of like creative algebra when looking at these types of things. So we know that 550, if we're trying to do half of that, we're going to need to find out what half of 550 is. So give you a second, try and do that in your head. So 550 divided by 2 is 2.75, not 2.25, which is a common mistake that I myself made, but it is 2.75. So we do that, see, it goes down, our part has changed, and it's gone down even further. So now we've actually got it where this arc is crossing that center line. We don't want anything crossing this center line because that is what we're going to mirror. And it actually won't let us mirror, I'm pretty sure, if we have something crossing that line. So what we can do, these aren't locked down. We haven't given them like a solid, changing the radius to 60 doesn't really mean anything about the length of this line. So what we're doing, if we just pull this, you can literally grab any part that you want and move it. Now we need to keep a couple things in mind when we're doing this. So looking down here, see how this kind of comes like straight in, like it's a nice ramp, off ramp there? We want that because this has to flow really nicely into our next part. If it comes up with like a lip at the end, we're gonna get this weird like jump, like an off ramp almost type thing. So we don't want that. Now that we have that, we need to get rid of some of our little excess stuff. So I'm gonna grab my trim tool, and we just have this little thing down here, and we're just gonna cut that off. Cool. So now that's fine. Oh, we got this one too. I don't want that either. So now we've got a nice trimmed shape, and this also does a nice job of flowing right into like a nice even curve for later. So now that we have that, we're going to click Finish Sketch. Now you're going to click Finish Sketch, and we need to do the extrusion so that we can add in our circles and add our holes in. So don't worry about any of this stuff yet. This is all for this little peg up here. There's a lot going on here. So how much do we need to extrude it? Well, look at this. Can you figure it out? So looking at this image, how much are we supposed to extrude it by? Now, the extrusion is how much we are bringing this part up, and we know that the distance from here to here is 1 inch. So I'm going to extrude it 1 inch. Hopefully you got that same answer. So it'll automatically select that shape maybe. If it doesn't, you can click the profile. But because it's the only thing that exists in this part, it's going to say, okay, you must mean you want to extrude this. So our extrusion is set to 1 inch. That's great. Cool. Now we get into the fun stuff. So this is pretty solid. Now we need to add the little circles and things like that that are going to go around the edge. So the circles, they've given us the one down here. We've actually modeled the part up top, which is fine. We just need to use these similar dimensions on this side because I know that this is mirrored. So it's going to be the same distance all around. So it says that from the center line, this hole, the center of this hole is 1 inch, okay? And the center points of all outer holes are 1 inch away from the edge. So we're going to have to do something to make sure that all of our outer holes are 1 inch away from the edge. So what I'm going to do, there's a neat trick you can do. I'm going to create a sketch on this plane. So if you need another demonstration of how I just created that sketch right on that face, you literally, as long as you're not in a sketch, click on the face and come over to Create Sketch. This creates a plane directly on the face of your object so that you can just model right on top of it. Most of you know that already. I'm just kind of reiterating. So now we want this shape, these holes, to go around here. And if you notice, like there aren't any really in the center of our part. So we're not going to want any holes down here, just up around this outer edge. So what I can do, I need to create a track. And this track where everything is 1 inch away from the edge. So one inch away from this, 1 inch away from all of this. So I can do that really, really easily. This is pretty hard if I just wanted to model this again and make it 1 inch. But Inventor makes it really easy with the offset tool. So if I grab the offset tool, I can click this outer edge of our sketch. And you'll see this blue box here. So when you have this blue box, I can just set this to 1 inch. And look at that. So we've got exactly the same geometry, just moved in, offset away from the edge a little bit. Saves us a ton of time. Now what we don't want is this whole thing. If you notice, our first hole for this top starts right here, and ends before we even get to this third arc down here. So we need to make sure that our track for our curve-driven line doesn't go all that way around. We don't need to worry about that just yet. We're going to have to do that on another sketch. But this is now 1 inch away from each of these edges, which is exactly what I want. You can test it if you want, and you can see that it's 1 inch, and then up here, oh, that one's a little tricky because this is an arc. It's hard for Inventor to know the distance between this arc and this point, because arcs, like the distance is going to be different at every one of these points. So just to tell it one, it has trouble with. But you can be confident that this is in fact 1 inch away. So we need to create our circle. So we're going to create a circle here. Cool. Bingo. Easy circle. How big is this circle supposed to be? Well, if you look, we have a dimension coming off of this hole. It says 10x at 1. So what is this weird circle with a line through it? That is the dimension. That is a dimension for the diameter. So the diameter is twice the size of the radius. The radius is the distance from the outer edge of a circle to the center. The diameter is that same thing, but instead of stopping at the center, you go all the way through to the other side of the part. So the diameter is always going to be twice as long as the radius. So we know that it's 1 inch. So I'm going to grab my dimension tool, set it down, 1 inch. Cool. Got that. Now, next thing we need is to extrude this. So we're going to click the extrude tool. We're going to click our circle, but we don't want it to come out. We want to cut it out. So we're going to come down to extrude with a cut, which is this second option here that kind of looks like a printer with a piece of paper going into it. And the distance, whoop, lost my part. The distance is fine at 1 inch because this whole thing is 1 inch, so this will go all the way through. You can double check that by just looking at the top. That's a nice looking beginning to our wishbone. So how to do a curve-driven pattern. This is really the crux of the whole wishbone. This is why this wishbone is so difficult. Now, if you'll remember when we did the sweep, we needed 2 separate sketches for the sweep. If you think of the sweep as driving a car, you need the shape of the car, which is our profile, which is the geometry that you are trying to sweep in a direction. And then you need the path, which is the road that our quote-unquote car is driving down. So curve-driven patterns are kind of similar to this in that you need 2 separate sketches. I repeat, you need 2 separate sketches for a curve-driven path. The first sketch is the thing, the profile that we are trying to pattern. In this case, what we are trying to pattern are these series of holes in our wishbone. So we are trying to pattern this. And we are trying to pattern it along a path. So we are going to need 1 sketch for the profile and a second sketch for the path. Now we've already used one of our sketches to make our profile, so we're already halfway there. So now we're going to create a new sketch on this and create the path. This is going to seem a little redundant when I do it, but trust me, there's a reason. So again, I'm going to come down and create a new sketch on this. It's really important here that you create a new sketch and don't just try and reuse the old one, even though we're doing them on the same surface. Normally, I would say, yeah, simplify your part and put them all in one sketch, but you can't do that here. So again, we need our path. Now the path, if you remember, is this general track that we want our holes to be patterned on. I know I want holes all this way and that we can get there with a pattern. So I need to make a track that goes all this way and stops like right here. So again, to get that exact geometry where it's going to be exactly 1 inch away from the edge, we're going to use the offset tool. Now you're going to click offset from sketch mode, click the outer edge of your part, you're going to type in 1 inch again. This should feel really familiar because we did this in the last sketch. We had to do it in another sketch though, because you need 2 separate sketches. We had to do this once to find out exactly where to place our hole. And now we're doing it in a second sketch because that is going to be the track that we are traveling along. So once we have that, you're going to right click and hit OK. Now, again, we don't want all of this. We only want about till this second end of this arc. So I'm going to trim the rest of it away. We don't need this. We don't need this. We don't need that. Be careful when you're clicking. You might delete something that you actually really want. Don't need that. And we don't need that. So let's see. Ours ends right here, kind of almost in the middle. That seems pretty close to where theirs ends. So I'm fine with that. You're probably not going to get this 100% exact. And that's also not what I'm looking for. I want to see that you can get this really close using the dimensions and using the pattern. I am looking to see that you know how to use a pattern and that you know how to use the mirroring. So now that we have our path, I'm going to hit finish. Once we've hit finish, now the fun part begins. So we go up here in our 3D model tab to rectangular pattern. So you're going to click that. Now, how many cursors do you see that are orange? So I see 3. Excuse me. So we're going to need to make a couple clicks here. This actually breaks the rule where we don't need 3 clicks, because typically as many orange cursors as you have, that's how many clicks you make. So we're going to start with features. Features we definitely need. So we're going to click on features, and we're going to highlight the feature that we're trying to pattern, which is our hole. So we've clicked that. Now the direction. I'm going to grab the cursor for direction 1, and I want to highlight this track, which is where we're trying to pattern. Now, you should get just one little hole right here next to the one you already made. That's not what we want. What it's doing right now, at least on mine, is spacing them. This is saying, okay, you want 2 holes total and 1 inch separate from center line to center line. So these don't look like they're 1 inch apart, because this is saying from the center of the hole, they're 1 inch apart. And that's true. That looks about right. So we're going to come down and change this from spacing to curve length. So changing it to curve length says follow the track that I've given you. Okay, go around and go this whole curve length. Now this one just put it right at the end, which we don't want that either. We need some more holes in there. So how many do we need though? We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just remember, we're just modeling this top part. So I'm going to change this to 5. And look at that. That looks great, actually. Sometimes what you have to do, if it's not in the right position, you may have to play around with flipping it with this button, or playing around with the mid plane. Sometimes that can mess things up. Or you have to go down here and tell direction 1 to start right at this circle. So that is a possible thing that could be messing you up. Once you've gotten your 5 holes to where they look like this, you're going to hit OK. So that is the pattern. That is what I'm looking for. That's the main thing. So now what we need is to add the other side. Now to add the other side, what we need to do from our 3D model tab, it's really easy. This is one of the coolest features in Inventor is the mirror tool. I'm going to grab mirror. Now we want to mirror the solid output, okay? We want to mirror this whole thing. So if you go to mirror solids, it should highlight the whole thing for you. You shouldn't need to click anything for solids. So now we need our mirror plane. So our mirror plane, we have this up here. We need to mirror it over this line. We need to make it duplicate down this way. So to do that, my mirror plane is going to be this flat inner surface here. So as you see, you can kind of see a preview of it. We do not want to remove the original. We want to keep the original. Now we're going to hit OK. So now looking at that, looking at the one over here, there's a difference. Mine is like, that has a deeper groove here, but I wouldn't take any points off for this because you are using the pattern and the mirror. Those are the two things that I'm looking for. You're getting really close. You will not be asked to do this type of thing on the certification exam. You may have to make a curve-driven pattern, but they'll likely already provide you with the tracks and things that you need. You just need to know that you need two separate sketches and how to utilize both of those sketches to make your curve-driven pattern. So now that we have this, we don't want to mirror it over this line yet because we're missing something. We're missing this little button thing. And if you look, it pops up and it has a hole in it of some sort. So we're going to have to figure out what we need to do to make that. Okay, so what I need to do is start a new sketch. Now, I want to put a circle in here because we're going to need to extrude a circle. I'm just going to throw it in here. We're going to see what we got because we did not measure how long this part is. So that could cause us some problems. Or maybe not. Maybe it's an easy fix. We'll see. So we know that this circle, the center of this, needs to be 14.5 inches away. And it should still give us some room on the end there. So hopefully what we're going to do is dimension this to this. If we put 14.5, oof, okay, so that actually I'm totally fine with that. I'm not really going to. If you want to change it, what you can do, we can go back into our first extrusion, edit this sketch, and we can say, okay, how long is this supposed to be? If this from here is supposed to be like 14.5, I might say that like there to there is like, I don't know, 18. Let's say 18. So I'm just going to take this, make this 18 instead. Now, when you do that, certain things like we have to move some stuff around now because we played around with it. So I'm going to bring that in. My curve's a little too much now. Okay, that's fine. Let's see what happens. Ah! Our pattern got messed up. So what that means is we need to go back and edit our pattern. So we need to go back under our pattern, sketch 1, and edit sketch. So I'm just going to delete this whole thing because we're going to have to redo this pattern. It's a great opportunity for you to focus again on how to do patterns. Offset tool, offset this bad boy 1 inch. Great, it still lines up really well with that hole. We're going to do some trimming. Trim this guy and this guy and this guy. All of this so that we just have our track again. Finish our sketch. Part 1. Errors occurred during the update. That's okay. We are going to edit our rectangular pattern feature. Our feature, again, is this. Our direction, we need to tell it the new path. So our feature is the hole. We click the orange cursor for direction. Great. We don't want distance. We do want 5 of them, but we want this to go along the whole curve. That looks better. Okay. So now we got that. Now this 14.5 is in a much better spot. So I'm going to collapse my rectangular pattern over here. Come into my sketch for sketch 5. Now, how big is this hole supposed to be? So this hole, this is tricky. This hole has a diameter in total of 1.5. So I'm going to diameter that at 1.5. Yeah, it's way too big. It's at 2.23 already. 1.5, fine. Finish your sketch. So now we need to extrude it up and then make the rest of it. So how much is this extruded up? So we know that the dimension from here to here is 1.5. So from here to here, I come off this line here and see, oh, it's also 1.5. We're going to extrude it to 1.5. 1.5. You can double check your work before you hit OK. That looks fine. Now that we've got 1.5 up there, it's hard to see. There is another little cut out circle in here. And that circle has a diameter 0.75. So I need to make a new sketch on the top so that I can add that circle. And again, I just come down, I click on the top face, create sketch, circle, make sure I'm grabbing that same center point so that these are concentric with each other, 0.75. So you got 0.75, finish your sketch. Now how deep does this cut come out? You can see it's cut out down here. So we need to make that come down 0.5. So I'm going to also grab my extrude this down, not 1.5, we need to change to 0.5. Okay, that's fine. We're getting real close now. So we've used the 1.5, the 0.75, the 1.5, this 0.5. Now we have this tiny little thing here, and if you've noticed, we've got this flat edge. So we know that that is going to be 0.125, but what are we using to make that? How do we get this flat edge on the side? Hopefully you're thinking, well, you should use either the fillet or the chamfer. So we want to make a flat edge. Will that be better with a chamfer or a fillet? Yeah, it's going to be better with a chamfer. So you're going to grab the chamfer tool and just click this outer edge. It should default set to 0.125, but it might not. So you're going to have to change the distance to 0.125 and hit OK. We are almost done. This looks great. So now the last thing we need to do is mirror this whole thing. So again, in my 3D modeling tab, after I've exited the sketches, you are going to grab the mirror tool. And again, we want to mirror the whole solid. So we need to come down here and click mirror solids. And then we want the mirror plane. So we're trying to put it over here. So you should know that the mirror plane is right here. This is the one that we want if we want to mirror this whole thing up this way. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Again, we don't want to remove the original or anything like that. And this is our completed wishbone. So that took a long time to kind of walk through. But in the end, it's not that difficult to make once you know what you're doing. Really just knowing how to use those patterns are really going to save you a lot of time. So if we look at the model, the things that I used to make this, we had 2 extrusions. So one for this first little chunk, this first quarter, and then a second extrusion for the whole. We made another sketch with the track that allowed us to make our rectangular pattern. Once we had our rectangular pattern, we mirrored that whole thing over to the other side. Once we mirrored it to the other side, we had to make this extrusion, another extrusion to cut out the middle of that button. We chamfered that. So these extrusion 3, extrusion 4, and chamfer 1 are all for this button. Once we had that, we mirrored it again. So we made this part using not too many different things. But yeah, there you go. There's your wishbone. So please go ahead and follow through these steps. Hopefully you've been following through them because it's kind of a lot to keep track of. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions in class or anything like that. I can help you. Though I may just refer you back to the video unless the video is just not working for you. Okay, this is me signing off. Hope you enjoyed.